Hello, everybody. It's Brian for Breakdown Security. Miss Berlin's with me today. This is a special daytime episode of our show as part of our discussion with Blumira. They're a sponsor of our podcast, and we wanted to make sure that we highlight Blumira and as much as we can. So today we have a very special guest, CTO of the company, Matthew Warner. Welcome, Matthew, for coming. Thank you for coming.
Excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Right on. So this is Amanda's boss's boss, or Amanda's boss.
He's been both.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
Amanda has worked
All right.
for me, with me, I don't know, 8 years, 9 years now.
Oh my goodness.
It's been a while.
Yeah.
Has it been 8 years? Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, then
5-ish.
yes.
I should probably
Okay.
because I found it, but yeah, somewhere in there. And then before that as well. So yes, she's had to deal with me
Okay.
for many years at this point.
Right on. So Matthew, people may not know who you are out there. So, in tried and true ways that we do here, tell us about yourself. How did you get to become the CEO of a startup? And, what do you like about being a CTO of a startup?
It's a long sordid tale, but generally speaking, my background is in security and software engineering and IT and all sorts of things. And back in the noughts of the 2000s and the good old days, I had started a few security companies and a few other companies around encrypted file sharing, and kind of got the itch to try to solve security issues, generally speaking. And back then we were young and stupid, and we didn't know how to sell anything or market anything or create anything that people wanted, but we were good at coming up with random ideas. And over the following years through there, which is where I ended up meeting Amanda, I went to an MSP and helped them rebuild a lot of their services, really focused more around like security services, vulnerability management, threat detection, building it out all of ourselves. And as we were going through that process, I think Amanda probably would feel similar about this. We just couldn't get it to scale in any real way. It was a home built kind of elk stack situation. And as we were going through that process, we being myself, a few of the security people, and the other engineer we had, kind of realized, hey, we could do this in a scalable way that actually solves a bunch of problems for SMB and mid-market, and not just run Elasticsearch while trying to get the RAID to work at 3 a.m. And that was in 2018. And ever since then, we've been trying to kind of solve problems in new ways for the smaller companies in the world that need security. And founded it then, and here we are. And that's how I ended up as CTO, because I was the founder and people couldn't tell me I couldn't be the CTO. So
nice.
Yeah.
Nice. You wear a lot of hats at the beginning of a startup. You're the CTO and the janitor and the guy who brings in donuts on Fridays, and that kind of thing. Head developer, that kind of thing. So you got a lot of hats. Yeah. Very nice. One of the things that we've talked about with Amanda and with our previous interviews, and this is not the first time that Blumira has sponsored us, and it's a great opportunity. You mentioned a little bit of the background there, 3 a.m., overly complicated SIM, setups, but there are a lot of companies that do XDR, the DRs, star DR kind of thing. Why did you think that you were different than those folks? Well, I mean, what makes you different than those other organizations or companies in terms of how you work?
Yeah, it's a really strange, in a good way maybe, environment that we kind of live in at this point, especially in the security world, especially when you think about the SIM side of the security world, where there's really not ever been a deep focus on supporting the non-heavily technical group of people. Like, even if you are a very technical security person, if there's only one of you at an organization, you don't have the time to run a SIM. You especially don't have the time to stand it up yourself. And it's one of those areas that, while there are a lot of different DR companies. And as we were just founding Blumira in 2018 is when Palo Alto spun out the concept of XDR, which, you know, looking back to where we are now in the market, I mean, there's just this natural pressure that happens in security where an organization has a problem, they create a new acronym, that acronym gets adopted by the world, and then it's now the thing. We saw it with ZTNA, with Zero Trust. We see it with XDR now. We'll see it again with many, many other things as we move forward, I'm sure, in the industry. But I think really the way that we look at this here at Blumira is that there's this baseline need for better access to data and detections, especially in smaller organizations, especially with the side of SIM. And realistically, in my very biased opinion, an XDR without a strong SIM is a pretty useless piece of technology. It might give you good visibility into what's happening in your endpoints, but you lose so much other value from other areas of your environment, be it cloud infrastructure, your firewalls, and being able to kind of holistically pull that together really allows organizations that are smaller to be more successful than they would have been otherwise with those SIMs that are like, well, stand it up, send some data. You can pick from like 3,000 detections. Good luck finding the ones that are good for you, and good luck. And what we see is if you don't approach people in that way, and instead approach them in a way that is supportive of their needs, which are reducing risk, finding bad stuff, stopping ransomware, that those are really kind of the needs of those people. And it's not a, well, I want to spend 24/7 threat hunting and I have a team that's going to do that threat hunting, because it's not relevant realistically for those people. So for us, and the way that we look at XDR and the way that we look at the environment is kind of the Blumira is a SIM first XDR. The data is important, the detections are important just as much as getting that data from the endpoint is important, and being able to perform responses on them. And that really solves the majority of problems that we see across those smaller organizations, because they need that help.
Right. Right. So you're targeting, I would say, smaller and medium-sized organizations that don't have dedicated, SOC or dedicated monitoring team. Larger organizations that I know of have things like, go even further. They have their own threat detection or threat engineering teams that can, look at these things. Was that the untapped community? Is it like most XDRs and DRs are targeting those large companies because they have fat pockets and big wallets and that? And what is unique to the small and medium businesses that you identified that you felt like needed to have a product that covers that?
Sure, yeah. I mean, the main part that's unique for those organizations is that they don't have the resources that large organizations do. When you're a smaller organization, unless you are a very mature organization from a security perspective, which is to say the leadership of that company has decided they're going to dedicate a significant amount of money into security, which is a very rare thing in the SMB and mid-market, you're pretty much in 99% of cases we see going to have an IT team and maybe one or two security people. And in those situations, it's really hard for them to go and look at the enterprise level solutions and have them work for them in a way that they want them to work, because realistically, they're not built for one person to run across a whole organization. They're built for a team of people to run and execute and configure and make work the way that would be best for that organization. So it's really more about being really opinionated as an organization, Blumira, and saying, this is how we think you should be detecting things. This is how we think you should be pulling in that data. And this is what we think is most important from the standpoint of security and defense. And just being very clear about that, because realistically, when you get into that bigger enterprise level, they're very opinionated about how they think their security should work. Like, they know this is how we work. This is how this is going to work. We want a product that's going to work for us in kind of our structure and our process. But when you're selling to organizations that are, under 5,000 employees, even if they have a security team, that security team is so busy with doing vulnerability management, keeping everything working in the right direction, that to say like, all right, let me sit down and write a whole new detection for the MOVEit exploit is like, well, that's probably not going to have time to do that. You're probably going to put more time into other things, which is totally okay. And really what we end up seeing is this weird focus toward company specific desire for detection of like, well, we know we really want to see that thing. And realistically, what ends up happening is you lose this massive piece of detection effort that should happen around like, should we just look for what ransomware is doing in a behavioral perspective? And if you aren't putting in that time and you're instead putting that time into, well, we got this fancy thing, we got this team to work on that fancy thing, you can miss things even in larger organizations. So it really is about less of a, this works great for small and this works better for big. It's really more about being very opinionated as a detection team, and Amanda knows that very well, and being very
opinionated.
Oh, and making sure that people kind of get what they need out of a sim rather than what they kind of perceive as like, I think that would be really nice to have out of it. The market has changed so much in security, and part of it is that there's just more data now. Like, there's just a lot of data that comes in, and for our customers, we don't want them to have to worry about how much data they're bringing into us. We want them to only have to worry about how to solve problems. So I mean, it's also a big hitch for us is that when we bring customers in, we don't ask them how much data they send, we don't ask them their EPS, we don't care. It does not matter to us. We only care that we get enough information to give them insight into that information, because that's what matters realistically to them.
Yeah, it's interesting because you mentioned earlier that large companies already have their way of doing business, right? And the small and medium, I wouldn't call them less mature, but I would say that they don't have a process in place, or it's not, we handle that as a firefighting technique on. So you coming in, you're actually not just giving them a product. It's almost like you're augmenting their staff in many cases, where you're helping to fill a need immediately that is necessary. Do you find? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, in some smaller businesses, I've seen they're just really lucky, right? If they're like, oh, I never have any of those problems, like I can create all my own detections, that's fine. Some of those places are really, really lucky. They have really mature security programs at a smaller level because they just got one or two really, really bright people to work there that aren't being attacked by like the rest of the organization to do a bunch of other things. Or at some point, like a founder is like, yes, we're going to prioritize security and we're going to give you the budget, and they set that aside. So I think some even smaller businesses can be lucky sometimes, but it's definitely the exception to the rule.
Right. So one of our Twitch streamers said, do you think big paid research companies that market are being used to market, to push products, like new acronyms and what have you? I think what we're trying to Profits, please let me know if this is the case. But it sounds like are big research companies being paid to push specific kinds of products based on information that they have, or are they actually influencing how the industry is being driven? Do you see that in any way where they're XDR is now the new hotness, and next month it's going to be something with AI in it or blockchain? I mean, we've seen these fads as we go along. Media will talk about these things.
API security is next.
It is, yes.
API security is next. Oh, okay. Well, we'll talk about that in a minute. But who's wagging the dog here? Is it the threat actors, or is it the media companies?
I mean, the kind of cybersecurity has its own almost like geopolitical force that lives inside of it, and it's really its own way. XDR came out of Palo Alto knowing that they needed to have a way to pull all their products together. I mean, that was in 2018. There was a CTO of Palo Alto coming out and saying like, this needs to change. And if you kind of pull back the veil a bit, it's easier to see like, well, they had a SIM product, they had an endpoint product, they had another product, and they needed to pull them all together under one umbrella to say, well, no, it's actually this thing, it's XDR. And they were doing it from the standpoint of enterprise, because they're selling to enterprise. Their XDR is starting at probably around $250,000, $300,000 a year, just because that's the nature of that type of business. But I mean, realistically, like you look at Gartner, you look at Forrester, those are not free. Those companies that work with those analysts are not like doing it out of the goodness of their own heart, generally speaking. All of technology and really all of the glory of capitalism is structured through those kind of like research and different analysts that do that kind of work. But that being said, I think it does a lot to kind of structure the industry for people that are buying in the industry. And ever since we didn't start as an XDR, we started as a SIM, but we just pushed that we did a SIM. And we released our XDR earlier this year when we released our agent as well. And the biggest change realistically has been that we have more conversations with more people, because when people are now freshly entering the industry, what they see is XDR. They don't see SIM. They see that people are using XDR. They don't see that people are using SIM. So their conversations that those people are having, maybe they've never worked in security before. Maybe they were in IT for 20 years and they were told, hey, you need to figure something out because cyber insurance said so. They're pushed into a situation where their only thought process is, well, I need an XDR. So they need someone to then say, well, it's not just that. It's also getting more value out of your data, getting more detection capabilities out of it. And it's not just about that endpoint, which is why you see such a big push out of endpoint providers doing XDR. Palo Alto has their own, Microsoft has their own, SentinelOne and CrowdStrike all have their own. And they're also all structuring around a product they already had, for that matter.
You have to buy into the whole ecosystem.
You buy into that ecosystem. Yeah. And there's, of course, open XDRs out there that are a bit different as well. Like Cybereason, which has had their own kind of stuff that they've been working through, but none of those are focused on SMB and mid-market. None of those are focused on taking what is essentially looked at as XDR as this kind of holy grail of security. It's going to bring everything together and it's going to correlate everything and everything will be perfect, which is obviously impossible and will never happen in the world of security. But how can we get closer to that for mid-market and SMB is really the big question, because I don't think any of us are ever going to stop hearing well, there's not enough people in security. Well, there's just never going to be enough people. How are we going to get more people in security? And we see people all the time in every level of the market. They're like, well, I'll just go to an MDR. Or I'll just go to someone who's going to have a SOC for me 24/7. And my response to that is always, where do you think they are getting these people from that are managing this growing accounts that they have inside of their environment? If you are having trouble getting people, they are having trouble getting people. And any of us who've worked 24/7 SOC know that it is one of the hardest jobs you will do, especially on a managed service kind of situation where you lack context. It's never going to stop. And you're going to keep pushing until you inevitably burn out is what it comes down to. So it's really more for us about how do you deliver that same level of kind of fidelity and capability without creating burnout for the team, without the need for that 24/7 SOC they're watching, as well as the kind of the general accessibility to what to do next. And in general, kind of the way that we look at that is other XDRs are not really focused in that direction. They're more focused in the direction of injecting an MDR into it or just having the glory of an XDR, like in the case of the larger ones. And it really is more of a taking it back to the days of SIM, which I know no one is super loving the days of SIM these days, but it's still just as important to pull in that data and get value from that data. So I think it's definitely something that there is a push from research firms, and realistically, all of us in the industry pay research firms to write stuff for us. Like, that is just the reality of the world. Is it a great reality? No, but it is the reality where, everyone wants to get more leads. Everyone wants to make more money because everyone has to grow. And you run into that situation where it's like, well, now XDR is the best. And you sit down and you think a little more about it. You're like, well, is it really just SIM with a better UI and also an endpoint data? And it's like, well, yeah, it is that, but it also can do response. And realistically, what it comes down to is what is the most streamlined way to help solve a problem for people. And if that's the way that you approach it, and it's the way that we approach it, then it's a lot more focused on problem solving and a lot less focused on kind of the glory of the XDR.
Right. Right. So I was looking through your website. If you go to blumira.com/break, you can get a demo or you can check out the white paper on XDR stuff. But I was also looking through the website and you actually put your pricing information on the website. Now, I'm not a smart salesperson, but why that seems odd to me. Everything is like, oh, request a quote, or hey, sign up, for a demo, or come meet us at RSA. Why did you want to put your pricing information out? I mean, that seems fairly, I would say radical, but I don't see a lot of companies that are like, this is how much our product costs.
It's really important in the SMB and mid market and MSP market as well, because we do a lot of work with MSPs to be as transparent as possible in pricing, and that part of that goes into how we don't charge on volume, and we also don't have limits on volume, and part of that goes to making pricing predictable. Anyone who has dealt with SIM pricing over the last 10-20 years has watched kind of the evolution from, well, we're going to do it by EPS, or we'll do it by gigs per day, or we'll try to figure out what the best way is to actually price this. Or how about you build your own data lake and then you pay for that, and then we'll do the other side of it. And all of those different kind of ways have resulted in situations where if you're a large organization that has the technical staff, it's not a hard, I mean, it's an annoying problem to solve, but it's not a hard problem to solve. You can pull the data together, you can look at what you have, you can quote it out, you have bodies that can do that kind of work for you. But if you have 3 IT people, no security person, and a 300-person organization, there's no situation where you're going to figure out the EPS of your log output or how much logs you send in like a perfect situation. Especially because for Blumira, usually when we're onboarding people, they haven't deployed Sysmon before. They haven't pulled in all of their logs from all of their hosts before, because usually they would have been somewhere else. Either they didn't have a SIM, or they would have been with another SIM that was like, well, we probably don't want to pull in a terabyte of data a day, so how about you don't do all of that? But for Blumira, it's more important to us to kind of put the onus on our engineering to make data collection and storage efficient, and make sure that the customer is just always able to get that level of visibility. And that flows up into the pricing as well, of we just have people pay for how many people work at their company. And if you are a company that has workers that don't really use machines, like you are a manufacturer and 200 of your employees really only check email, they don't do anything else, we don't make people pay for them. We really only make people pay for what we generally call knowledge workers, because they're the ones who are creating data. They're the ones who are kind of needing that level of protection and defense. And the best way to do that for all organizations is to bottom line and say, it's just going to be this much a year per person, or per month per year per person, and that's what you're going to pay. We're going to give you a discount on that. Let's be honest, we all know we're all going to get discounts on top of that, and that's it. That's all you're going to have to pay from here on out. And what we see is that there is it just makes life easier for everyone, that they don't have to think about it. And worst case, I mean, if someone is sending a lot of data for a weird reason, I guarantee they want to know about it, and we want to know about it. Of like, hey, it's kind of weird that your ASA is continuously throwing this error. You might want to look at how you set up your routing inside of your ASA. And those are the areas where it's a net benefit for everyone to say, hey, this is what's happening in your environment. Send everything so we can help you define more of these, instead of saying, well, just don't worry about that, which is kind of the classic way to go about it. Like, just don't send it, don't worry about it. Well, it's a you problem. For Blumira, I'd rather it be kind of a we problem for all of us in that situation.
Right.
Yeah, we found a handful of those, like routing issues. And I remember one time we had someone's SQL server just throwing like 10,000 errors per second, and just going insane. Okay. So it's nice to find those.
Yeah, my other thought was having it on your website. A small or medium business, they don't, if they need something, it's not going to have to go through purchasing and procurement and like Fortune 10, where it's like they got to go through a whole bunch of stuff, and there it is right there. You're getting the cost, and that's how much it's going to cost, and there's no negotiation. There's no like 3 months back and forth kind of thing. So I was just thinking along the lines of that. Having worked at a couple of small companies, it's like, I don't want to have to spend time, because I've got 15 other things I got to do. I have to sit in a sales call while somebody's trying to sell me some shit. So I was like, you know.
To your point, I mean, when people engage Blumira, generally speaking, our sales cycle is going to be under a month long. So, I mean, it's not going to be this thing where you're going to have to sit down, talk to someone for 4 months about how we develop a process. Just reach out, feel free to use the product for a bunch of weeks. We'll help you through that trial. And then if you want to buy it, great. Like, it's a very much structured around what's best for organizations, because in my opinion, at the very least, and I know Man and I have talked about this a lot over the years, the best way to get people to use a sim, like a sim, engage with a sim, stay with your sim XDR now these days, is to give them real value for what's happening inside of their environment, and actually do good detection engineering, because that's one of the hardest parts of sim and XDR, getting that high quality detections out to people without them being overly noisy, and making sure they can be tuned as such with very little effort on their side.
Right on. So I'd like to thank Mubix for coming and hanging out with us today. A good friend of ours, known him for years. Asked the question: having a wide visibility across small and medium businesses, what are 2 to 5 FUD or myths that you're seeing in the industry?
Oh, an SMB and mid-market. I would say probably the biggest things we see are around kind of the need to grow their defensive security without necessarily having the process in place to do anything about it, and getting pushed on that to go really hard, which is to say something along the lines of someone coming in and saying, well, you need to implement zero trust to make this successful in your environment. But if you haven't really defined the process of your org, you don't really know how your network is going to work, you haven't really structured it, maybe you're on a fully flat network and you're like, well, we'll just jam zero trust in and it'll be fine after that. What we are, I mean, realistically, and sad's not really the right word, but what we see in a lot of the industry, and I don't think it's different really in larger industry in the grand scheme of it all, is that it is really still the basics of IT and security that tend to still be the most important parts. And a lot of the FUD that lives inside of it tends to be either moving beyond that, of like, no, you'll never sort out the basics, so try out these things and they'll solve you in what you're doing and moving forward. So, I mean, most of what we see really tends to be less FUD around tech and more FUD around, like, you will never be able to be successful at your size of company doing this. And what we see generally is that people can be successful with a couple IT people and maybe one security person running their organization of 400 people, if they have everything structured in a way that allows them to be successful from a basics perspective of their organization. But it's so easy these days to kind of be pulled into, it's not really FUD, but kind of like open promises in the industry of like, no, it'll be totally great because you'll implement this and then it'll be perfect for you, and or we'll do all of it for you, and trust us, we're definitely going to make this all work for you. And in the grand scheme of life, it almost never goes that way in my experience, where you hand something to someone and then they do exactly what they said they were going to do. And I think really more important now than ever for organizations to have that ability to kind of introspect into themselves and say, like, this is where we are, this is what we need to get better at, this is where we're going. And I think there's the FUD side of it is really more focused on, especially into higher into business. So like business leaders of, you will never be able to do this. You need to find someone else who will help you do this, or you need to buy a bunch of technology like ZTNA or other things that will be layered on, and magically it will all be fine after that. But realistically, there's a reason why phishing and invalid credentials are still one of the top ways to get into environments. And when we see breaches in SMB, they're not different than breaches at enterprises. Like, realistically, when we see an Iranian oil rig dropped onto an Exchange server, that's no different if you are a 200-person company or a 200,000 person company. You're still getting attacked by that same type of attack. You still have to detect it the same way. You're not going to have a SOC that's there to do it the same way that 200,000 person company will. And you need to be able to, with the small amount of resources you have, be able to act on that. And putting some random technology in place is not necessarily going to solve that unless you're able to really focus on what's happening in my environment, what are my behavioral detections, how can I act when something happens in my environment. And so I do think a lot of the FUD is really more focused around you'll never be successful by this thing. And I think it really needs to be flipped more toward you can be successful if your organization will dedicate to allowing you to be successful, for lack of a better way to put that. It's one of the things, and I've written a bunch of blog posts that I'm sure no one wants to read because they're long and driven and very unnecessary around just kind of the industry and how there's this deep push to kind of move people away from working on the basics of IT and security and more toward, well, we'll just layer on technology and we'll pull in some contractors and it'll probably be okay. Or we'll put it on a 24/7 SOC, and if we get owned, it's their fault. And it's really something that preferably us in the security industry can move away from over the next few years, because realistically it doesn't save anything. Like we can all watch enterprise companies getting owned every week at this point, and they're not getting owned because they aren't trying. They're getting owned because there are more attackers than there are defenders. There always will be more attackers than there are defenders, especially as how large the industry is at this point for cybercrime. And the best way to defend against that is basics of IT, knowing what your environment is, visibility, and good detection engineering. And it's just so easy still for us all to go back 10 years when 10 years ago, there wasn't even ransomware. There was Emotet. There was some ransomware. Don't get me wrong. I know ransomware's been around since the early 90s, but it wasn't really being operationalized like we saw post WannaCry. So I think in general, the industry is still kind of getting its feet under it. And as we continue to grow the industry on the security side with non-IT security people, I mean, the nicest way possible to non-IT security people who've been coming into the industry, you get this kind of breakdown of basics on the IT side where there really is still that need to reinforce it inside of the SIM, which is why we do things at Blumira, like we alert people when the drives are failing in their Windows machines with the smart drivers, just because it's useful information. It's an important basic to know when your drives are failing, and it helps you get ahead of things. And while that's not security risk, it is an availability risk as it pertains to what's happening in your environment. So it's really like, I look at it as there's been this kind of change over the last few years of not necessarily FUD of like ransomware is going to happen to you, because I think everyone is just like, I'm going to get hit with ransomware at one point. Like it's never going to happen. Or at least I'm going to get attacked at one point and someone will land in my environment at one point. And the focus has been moved into like, well, you're never going to be able to do it. So you need to find a SOC that's going to do it for you. You need to find an MDR that's going to do it for you. But and I'd be interested in Amanda's thoughts here. Not that I'm going to put her on the spot here or anything. We've seen a lot of ransomware attacks. We have focused heavily on these kind of detections, and we've seen organizations with one IT person successfully defend against these kind of attacks because they have what they need available to them to do so.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, ransomware so far that we've seen almost always lands on a perimeter device, right? It's probably due to outdated technology or lack of 2FA or sometimes ODAs. But I mean, there's been only a few times that it's actually like gone through and can't say that word, gone through their network, right, and actually pivoted and ransomed more than just the edge device. Yeah, and I mean, it's all about the visibility. If you can stop the first command from being run on that Exchange server, it's going to save you a whole lot of time.
Yeah,
right.
And that time matters when you only have one or two people.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, I have another question. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but so we're talking about visibility, right? And so Rob was asking a question about where do you fall in the debate of collect all the things you never know what you would need versus collecting what's important. I know from Miss Berlin's point of view, she needs as much as she needs to make a proper, detection, and hopefully, along that pyramid of pain, which we talked about on
Yeah, I was
Sunday
going to bring that up earlier.
with Megan Roddy and those. It's like the more information you have, the better. But like you're going to hit a point where it's like I'm collecting too much information and I'm not getting a lot of value out of it. So,
Sure.
where do y'all fall on the collect all the things versus what you need kind of thing?
We fall in kind of like we generally lean in the direction of collect all the things. Although I think over the last kind of 2 years, Amanda and I and a few of the other people have started to tighten that a little bit. But generally speaking, we do pull in pretty much everything. And if someone says, hey, and we were just talking about this morning, hey, I'd really like to pull in more from my Windows logs, we're happy to do it. Because realistically, like if I wanted to cut down data volume, I would not collect firewall logs. Like there's more data volume that comes out of like a Palo Alto firewall at the edge than comes out of most things, just because of what it's doing. It just is naturally doing a lot of work. However, to drop that data means you can no longer do lookbacks and threat feed evaluation. You can no longer see what's really happening at the edge of that environment. And it's useful information. And same goes to that failing drive kind of comment I made, that if you collect everything, and I realize that this is a big data problem at that point, you have the capability to do more with that data. And there have been a number of situations that I think Amanda and I have both been in where we've collected everything, gone back and been like, oh, we can now do all of these things because we've realized we have this data available to us. So it's really one of those areas that, could we only collect Microsoft 365 Exchange and Azure AD log? Sure. Yeah, we could. But then you wouldn't get that really nice benefit of saying, well, what are my users actually doing inside of Teams? What are they doing inside of SharePoint? How are they actually leveraging my cloud environments? And having the ability to, maybe it's not for threat detection, maybe it's for reporting, maybe it's for getting visibility into what your organization is actually doing, because realistically, that's just as important as a security benefit of that data. The data is available. Why not know how your users are leveraging that technology? Because it's important. It's important to know what they're doing. And I know that there's from the nanny state perspective, I know it's not necessarily good to just monitor what humans are doing all the time. That being said, it is important to know how people are using your technology. It just is. So we very much lean on the side of pull it all in. And what we see is that it ends up being a really important part of especially a lot of organizations. So when you think about like counties, cities, that kind of thing, you have specific requirements around like, how do I access law enforcement databases? How much do I need to collect? What kind of data should I have? You very quickly run into those organizations and say like, well, I realize I need to collect all the data from all my police cars, but I don't know how I'm going to do that. And I definitely can't afford all of the volume that's going to be. When we get with them, it's a very easy conversation of like, no, you're just going to set this up. You're going to send all the data, and then you're not going to worry about this anymore, because that's really what they need inside of this industry at this point, is a simple solution to get to that. And as I alluded to this earlier, I'd rather us collect everything and have it be the job of me and my engineers to make it efficient and useful. And no offense to Amanda's team, but also the detection engineers to dig through the data and find the stuff, than make it the job of someone else. I think, or I suspect, that problem of collecting everything is a bigger problem when you have a SIM that you need to manage from the ground up. Whereas here at Blumira, we are managing how that data is being parsed, how that data is coming in, why that data is coming in, where that data is coming from, and what we're going to apply for detections for, as well as reports available for it. So it's rarely a situation that an organization is saying, well, there's so much, how could I ever find this thing? It's really more focused around, send us everything, we'll tell you what's important, and if there's something you need, let's get together and talk about it and figure out how to get that information out for you, with your solution architect or with the sales engineer, because everyone has their own needs when it comes to data. Some people will just want to know when someone logs into that one machine, which is totally okay. But that's the way that we look at it basically, is how can we make sure that everyone gets what they need out of all their data and not do it by constraining the data available, which when you build by volume or EPS, you just naturally are going to limit a lot of that data in the grand scheme of life.
Right. Makes sense. I know we're almost at the top of the hour here, and all of us have jobs here. So I just want to make sure that we're cognizant of everybody's time, and I appreciate that. There has been a lot of news about educational institutions, elementary schools. They've got nothing basically, and they get owned up left, right, and center. I used to live up in Seattle, and there were several schools that were hit by malware or ransomware, and they ended up having to pay for that. And we've had discussions with the CISO of Seattle Public Schools about how they handle IT and things. Do you work in that vertical? And my overall question here is what kind of work are you doing there to educate them on better practices? Because education security region and the industry itself, that is probably the most hostile outside of being actually in the military and warfare and nation threat actors. Because not only are you worried about the people coming in, you have to worry about 13-year-old who's trying to bypass the laptop controls so that they can play Fortnite on their laptops or something like that. So how does working in the educational security sector tax your resources, or how are you building better detections for those kinds of things?
Yeah, it's an interesting question for sure. We do definitely work in the education space, a fair amount more in the higher ed, but we definitely work also in the K to 12 and related spaces. And really what we see generally is that there really isn't this crazy difference between kind of the output of detections and that kind of thing. The main difference is that you have kind of this double brain that happens inside of education, where you have the staff. Like we have a number of situations like staff are on G Suite, or students are on G Suite, Google Education. All of staff is on Microsoft 365. And we have no idea how to look across both of them, and we aren't really sure how to get detections that are going to be valid across both of these sides as well. And generally speaking, when we get into them, they really aren't much different than a lot of the smaller organizations that aren't very mature, because they're going to focus on maturity from an IT or security perspective. And their technology is just one of those things where they're still working on investments in them. Maybe they haven't gotten everything they wanted over the last few years. But what we've found is that in the grand scheme of education, they are not much different than what education is from the standpoint of, or I should say, what they look like than other SMB organizations. They are very similar, other than there's some of the kind of the oddities in regard to who's using those machines or the dual kind of honed environment that lives inside of it. But their threats and how they get hit really are not different than what we see inside of other SMBs. But what I think happens, because it's kind of this natural evolution, is that you get this kind of deep focus inside of security where they're like, well, this vertical is different than that vertical, and this is how we need to approach that one, and they're special in this way. You see this, of course, in a more drastic way on the OT side of manufacturing, where it's like, well, this is different. And what we've seen through our work in OT networks and education and manufacturing, and it doesn't really matter where, so they all have super similar problems. The data is very similar. The detections are very similar. There may be some deltas, of course, in how and where those attacks are coming from. But generally speaking, the problem of kind of like the baseline problem of not enough investment, because there just isn't enough money to invest, not enough investment in humans, because there just aren't enough humans that want to work for that amount in cybersecurity, especially, and not enough focus on what that vertical needs, quote unquote needs, results in a situation where there's this perceived problem inside of the vertical, especially. And really, I think it kind of goes back to my comment before of, it really just kind of goes back to the basics of like, do you have someone who can respond to stuff? Do you have visibility? Right. Can you get what you need out of your data? And can you get money to invest in this? Because it doesn't help that the entire industry is smoke and mirrors in a lot of different ways, where like if you line up 10 SIMs next to each other, XDR, I don't care what it is, 2 of them will detect something, 5 of them won't detect something, and the other ones you won't know how to get working. And it really is one of those areas where there just hasn't been enough investment in those types of needs in the industry, generally speaking, that allows them to really push forward and be successful with the technology that's been provided to them. So, I mean, that's why we do provide playbooks to people. That's why we generate analysis for people. That's why we have a 24/7 security team available to people, because our focus is really more help you get better at the basics, help you prove why growing that maturity is important, help you have a baseline of detection aside of your environment, largely thanks to Amanda, and allow you to really be able to grow your team, grow your maturity, and not worry as much about that 13-year-old, but worry more about how to get better at your organization, how to show the value there, and how to keep growing and improving that integration as well. Because that's the other benefit of charging by user and not charging by volume. Every month, if they want to do something new, get a new integration in, get new data in, look at something new, we're happy to do it. And that really helps places like education kind of grow that integration over time and say, all right, here's how I can get better this day, this year, this month, and continue to improve my security.
Okay, very cool. So I got one last question. I'll start with Amanda, and then I'll go with Matthew here. Any last thoughts here? And also, you have a free tier. So the one thing I wanted to figure out is, how people can sign up for that and get free information, which is, again, the salespeople at other companies are like, why are you doing this? It's crazy. But I was just like, any last thoughts you might have about that and how people would be able to, what do they get when they take advantage of the free tier, and how can they continue talking from the Blumira community? So,
Yes, yeah, so,
Amanda?
I mean, one of the other reasons that Blumira kind of started was, I don't know who came up with the term or the idea or whatever, but it was to help the security poverty line, because there's so many people that can't afford a SIM or can't afford the implementation or don't have time for the implementation. So that's where the free edition kind of came out of, was the fact that you can get now. We started out with just being able to do Microsoft 365, but now you can pick like 3 out of 6 different integrations to have for free. And you have all of the detections that apply to those, as well as 3 weeks, I think, of data retention. Oh, 2 weeks. 2 weeks of data retention. And you can do it all without like talking to a salesperson, which is my favorite thing. Even though I love our salespeople, I know how much security and IT people do not. So it's a nice. It's a great like, get them in the product and see how much they like it, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Very nice.
To Amanda's point, Blumira.com/free. Please try it out. Right now, the 6 that are available are Microsoft 365, Duo Security, SentinelOne, WebRoot, Mimecast, and Cisco Umbrella. So if you have any of those, 1, 2, 3 of those, doesn't matter, you can try them out for as long as you want. There's no time limit on the free. We have people who have been on there for well over a year using the free, and we want them to keep using it. We look at it as kind of the entry point for a lot of organizations into what a SIM is. I think all of us in the industry probably have seen situations where it's a brand new technology for an organization. They have no idea how to price it. They have no idea what it's going to be like to use it. They really don't understand what it feels like. And we want the free version to really act as that entry point for people. Try it out, use it. You don't have to put it in a credit card. You can put in a fake name. I don't care. But it'll allow you to really see what you're going to get out of it. And yeah, I mean, you're going to get the ability to detect, business email compromise and any sort of thing inside of Microsoft 365 that would be bad. But it really is kind of back to Amanda's point around improving the accessibility of security for all organizations, reducing or changing that security poverty line and making it all just generally available. So please feel free to try out free. And that kind of goes back to my point before of it's our job to make sure it's efficient. It's our job to make sure detection works. here at Blumira. And the free is really a good example of how we make that work for organizations and how we make it work here inside of Blumira as well. You won't have to do any work. You just turn on the data source and then magically you get detections, and that's all you have to do. And that's how we've built kind of the entirety of Blumira, primarily because Amanda and I are tired people that don't want to deploy things for people. And we know that customers don't want to deploy things either. So why not have this all be an automated, simple structure for them to leverage, and free is along those same lines as well. So yes, please try it if you're looking for anything different, or if you've never used a SIM before and you have Microsoft 365 or any of the ones we mentioned, just throw your data in there and see what you find. It is available to everyone for that reason. Well, not to everyone. If you're a no-fat country, I'm sorry, you can't. If you're in Iran or North Korea, I'm sorry, you can't use the free. So I'm also listening to this if you are in Iran or North Korea, but hey.
Send us all of your threats and your IOCs and your TTPs, though. We want those.
We do.
Yes.
Yes,
We want
exactly.
those. Or if you're Limp Panda or, Lazy Bear or something like that. So, yeah, cool. All right. So, Matthew Warner, thank you so much for coming today. Appreciate your time. Miss Berlin, of course, also always a pleasure. I'm glad you were able to make this happen for us. And thanks to all of our listeners and watchers and new people who've joined us on our Twitch stream. And that was it for Breaking Down Security today for our special episode. Check us out at breakingsecurity.com, BRAKEING security.com. You can also join our Discord, discord.gg/breaksec. You can also join the MSP Geek Discord, and Blumira has a presence on there to talk and ask your questions if you have additional questions from Matt or Miss Berlin or any of the other Blumira folks. So, yeah, thanks everyone for coming. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk to y'all soon. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.